Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about the monster study done by Wendell Johnson in 1939. Has anybody ever heard of the monster study before? A couple people? Okay, so that actually works better. Can anyone guess where this study, like what state the study took place in?
Wasn't it Iowa?
Okay, so if you guessed the state of Iowa, then you're correct. But before we get into the actual study, here is why the monster study even existed. So the monster study was conducted by Wendell Johnson, a speech pathologist, which we'll learn about him more, to learn more about why children develop the stutter. Johnson developed the monster study to see if stuttering was a learning behavior or a biological aspect, and if there was a cure for it. Most researchers at that time would say that stuttering was all a biological aspect from your transmitters in your brain, but Wendell had an experience that said otherwise. So at the age of 5, his teacher told his parents that he was starting to stutter and slur when he would talk. So from when Wendell heard that to his point on, he focused more on his talking and his slurring and overcompensated everything that he said. So he became obsessed with his speech, and that developed the stutter. Oh, ignore that. So more about Wendell Johnson. He was a full-time professor at the University of Iowa until 1943 when he had a heart attack. He promoted his life to researching and carrying out studies on speech conditions. So another reason that this study, as I said before, was so close to Johnson was because he was also a stutterer. He stuttered so badly that he almost became speechless, where he would never talk if he didn't have to. So this led him into writing and literature, so then that he could use his humor to still be popular while he was in silence. Wendell became a speech pathologist because he never had one to help him through his stuttering, so he hoped that this study would help others. So Mary Tudor. So Wendell never actually carried out the actual study. It was Mary that did it for him. So she went to different places to find the participants. She carried out the research. She gathered up all of the results at the end. She was also a graduate student underneath of Wendell, so he was her professor at one point. So the monster study was conducted in 1936 at the University of Iowa. So he hoped to see that with using children, he could find out if it was at early stage when stuttering would begin, and if appraisal from teachers would affect if they stuttered or not. So 22 orphans from Iowa Soldiers and Sailors Orphans homes were gathered for the study. So the orphans were split into 2 groups, one labeled normal speakers, so without a stutter, and other ones labeled with stutters. So each group that you were in was how you were treated. So there were kids in the non-stutter group that had a stutter, and there were kids in the stutter group that didn't have stutters. They did that so then they could actually see the effects of the appraisal. So like in the stutter group, they were all treated the same, so they could see how it affected both of the sides of the study. So now to the study. So Johnson's team, Mary and I believe 3 other co-workers, would go meet with the children every few weeks for the next 5 months. This was from January to May. So they would evaluate their speech. Children in the normal group were praised for speaking well, even if they had a stutter in that group. And then the children in the stutter group were told that they were speaking poorly, so they were treated poorly. Some of the teachers would tell them that if they begin to stutter, they have to stop themselves immediately, or if they can't speak correctly, then don't speak at all. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I was told that, I'd run out the door. I would not do that. So the results, so there was only one improvement. So from the kids that were put In the non-stutter group, I think there were 6 of them that had a stutter. Only one of them actually had an improvement, so that meant that their stuttering actually lessened and wasn't as bad as it used to be. Now, one thing to remember that I said before is that there were people in the stuttering group that didn't have a stutter. There are 6 of them as well, and 5 of those children that were falsely labeled actually developed a stutter. So, just from the way that they were treated and talked to by the teachers. So the people in the stuttering group, the 5 that developed, actually ended up becoming withdrawn from everybody, and some of them even stopped speaking altogether because they felt ashamed for what was happening to them. So in some aspects, this study supported Wendell's hypothesis, but there's a little kick to it as we'll find out. Also, these children in here aged from the age of 5 to 15. So most of you are probably thinking, why have I never heard of this study since it's in Iowa and was at the University of Iowa? Well, Johnson did have good intentions for this study as to figure out why people studied and to find a possible cure for it. Before this study, Johnson and his colleagues did multiple studies on each other because he knew other people with stutters, so he did other studies to figure out on themselves why they developed stutters and a cure that they could do for it. But the other colleagues that were watching his process were worried about using orphans as research subjects. Now, this study was never published until, I believe, 2001, because at that time there was another person that was conducting studies on people, and that was the Nazis in Germany. So if you put the connection together, it didn't look very good for psychology. So the effects. This study left many of the stutterers with a psychological trauma. The students' schoolwork suffered, and one even ran away from the orphanage. 2 years later, they found the girl, and she said that study ruined her life and she'd never be the same again. The children didn't find out about what happened to them in this study until 60 years later. So the teachers didn't even know what was going on at that point. And then because of this, they used minors without their consent, so it really outbursted using consent in our psychology and research today. And then, yeah, the lawsuit when it was published in 2001 was $1 million lawsuit for all of them. And Wendell never got in trouble for it because he was already passed. That's all I have. Are there any questions? That's my references. Yeah, Emma?
So why was the study released so much later after, like, World War II ended?
Because kind of with the whole link with the Nazis and the Germany, they didn't want to show that they were studying on children, especially without their consent. Like, these kids were only 5 years old. So they didn't want it to have like a bad perspective on research and psychology in the university. Yeah.
So why did they decide to publish it when they did? Why didn't they just let it get pushed on the rug forever?
Well, I'm not full certain on why, but I did read that Mary kept doing research on it, so she kept kept in track with the kids and kept keeping an eye on them. So then she eventually went and published it herself without Johnson's approval. Yeah.
Why did they call it the monster study?
Okay, so they basically called it the monster study because they did the study on children. So now people would look back at this study and think, wow, that guy was completely nuts. He shouldn't have done that for doing it on kids, especially orphans who don't have consent for anything. So then it just kind of dubbed the monster study.
Does their findings support that it was an environmental cause then, or biological?
They found that it was more of a learning behavior, which Johnson already kind of knew this because of his experience from when he was younger. And then they saw how some of the the positive would make some of the kids' stutters better. So then they kind of figured out that it was more of a learning behavior.
That's all the time we have today.